Welcome to our Hangout series, Innovation by Design. This is designed for innovation and design thinking leaders to share what is working for them, as well as tips that can make others successful. Today, we're happy to share our Hangout topic that is Lean Startup and Innovation. Is it working? Before we jump in and introduce the panelists, what I'd like to do is just make sure you know what's going to happen over the next hour. We have about 45 minutes of dialogue with our panelists, and we'll take about 10 to 15 minutes worth of questions from the audience. So please be sure to go to the questions and answers tab and submit your questions, as well as if you could vote on any that you want to make sure we get to. We'll try to get to all of them, but we don't always. So we make sure we ask the ones with the most votes first. And we also have polls. If you could just take the 2 polls, that helps us really know, for the panelists to know how to really tailor the answers to their questions. And then, of course, if you'd like to engage in the conversation, we have folks standing by on Twitter. We're at altitude_inc, hashtag innovation by design, hashtag design thinking. And we'd very much like to hear from you. And any feedback is welcome. We do have the chat. Silage is here managing the chat. So we're happy to engage there also. And you will get the record. The record comes typically on Mondays after the Hangout. But in Massachusetts here, we have Patriots Day, so some folks aren't working. So therefore, it may be Tuesday. So Monday or Tuesday, you'll get the record. Now let's go ahead and jump in. For the past few years, Lean Startup and Agile have been really all the rage, right? We've seen the large companies turning to smaller companies with their entrepreneurial spirit to learn how to innovate. And by adopting these methods, it's been easier said than done. We see people trying. There's been a lot of success. There's been some failures. And today, we're very, very fortunate to have United Health, LPL Financial, and DentaQuest to share really the experiences that they've had when they've explored Lean Startup and Agile. Okay? So today, what I'd really like to do is introduce the panelists, because I know you're on to really hear from them. And I'm very, very excited to have a stellar group today. So first, Ed Boudreau, who's VP of Product Management at Optum. They're part of United Health Group and a Fortune 6 company. Ed leads Fusion in internal innovation and consulting team that leverages design thinking methodologies to drive business, experience, and development strategies. Hi, Ed.
Hello.
We're very glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
We also have Dan Williams. Dan is Executive Director of Innovation at DentaQuest, a new role for him. So very happy for you, Dan. And us also to have you here. DentaQuest serves the dental and vision needs of over 23 million individuals across 28 states. His past roles included design leadership positions at Isabella Products, Reebok, and Motorola. Dan's very respected in the fields of industrial and experience design, including technology and design strategy for consumer-oriented companies. And clearly, we will be talking about the consumer at the hub, so it's very, very relevant. And we have Aisha. Yes, Dan, thank you. And Aisha, and I always work on pronouncing your last name. She tells me it rhymes like piano, and I still hear in my head, I go, Tatiano.
Close,
so close.
So close.
Aisha's been on a few of our Hangouts. So we very, very much welcome you, Aisha. Thank you for joining us again.
Pleasure.
And Aisha is the VP of Innovation and Design Thinking of LPL Financial, which is the nation's largest independent broker-dealer. And she's responsible for the adoption of design thinking principles across the enterprise and on major projects and initiatives. So as you can see for our panelists, we have very, very diverse companies where they're from, but we also should get some good dialogue that should apply to large or small companies. So again, we thank the folks for joining in, and let's jump in. First, because the topic is Lean Startup, let's level set and make sure everyone's thinking the same when we're talking Lean Startup, since it's been around, since I think it wasn't Ed Reese's book done around 2011. So, around then, I think is when it really started to become the big buzz and the rage. So Dan, could you start off and just define it? Like, what is Lean Startup? And then our other panelists can jump in if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Gretchen. My understanding is it's a methodology for developing business and products. It uses techniques like validation, rapid experimentation, with a goal of shortening cycle times and reducing costs. The basic issues are, and I think as we've seen in the books and in the presentations of Lean Startup, that it's using rapid methodologies for testing and evaluating products early, getting consumer or customer feedback, using minimum viable product exercises for discovery. And I guess the overarching solution would be that you're sidestepping larger requirements for capital and shortening cycle times, and also identifying the inherent customer benefit or solution, which is obviously the goal of a startup. Anyone else would like to add to that?
Yeah, oftentimes when I'm working with my business users, this is completely new to them. Design thinking, lean startup, all of this stuff. They've literally never heard of anything like this before. So the way I explain it to them, as I keep it real simple, it's experimentation. It's using experiments to figure out if what you're designing is appropriate and has the outcomes you expected. And it can be as simple as that. It can be as simple as just testing stuff out.
Yeah, it's interesting, the experimentation. I mean, I think, we all talk about the continuous innovation, right? Iterate, continue to innovate. It's not one and done, right? And really looking at that shift from the build, measure, learn, right? To learn about our users, then measure and build, right? And I think that's really, a big part, at least that, I'd seen in Eric's book, and then, what people are talking about.
Yeah, Dan, just great entry. And Aisha, I love your commentary as well around using the word experimentation. I think we've heard, fail fast. I've actually tried to erase the word failure from my mind and use experiment and actually leverage that in the enterprise to get people comfortable with, that idea of experiment. Let's try this experiment. We find ourselves using it all the time and eliminating that fast failure, the word failure, because it's not a failure. An experiment is about learning. And, if you think about lean startup, everything's about experimentation. What did we learn? And then how do you adapt?
Good point, Ed.
Yeah, no, excellent. All right, well, now that we've defined it, let's talk about what does lean startup have to do with corporate innovation? Thus the title of what we're listening to today of the Hangout. And how have you specifically employed or adopted it? Ed, why don't we have you jump in and continue?
Great, thanks. I really think of lean startup as a mindset, right? You could think of it as a process, and a lot of things could be a process, but a mindset of how do we, think differently? How do we empathize? So that design thinking, for whom are we serving? Identifying, that customer set that you can empathize with, understanding their pains, and really, creating those subtle experiments and testing that in the market. One of the ways we've used it here at Optum is we use Google Sprint methodology, which I think of as lean startup as well. We had providers in, doctors in on a Monday and Tuesday, and really ran through a design sprint. And then by Friday, we actually had a design concept for Google Glass that we tested with those same providers. So to me, that mindset of how do we, experiment, how do we understand our end users, how do we put something in their hands or their minds right away to test, and seeing where that experiment goes, what did we learn, and then bringing that to market.
Aisha, is there anything you'd like to add to that? I know we talked a little bit about this topic earlier.
Yeah, I find lean startup picks up where design thinking leaves off, right? So design thinking gives you a methodology to refocus your thinking on the end user versus yourself, starting with desirability before feasibility or viability, right? And all the things we know from lean for managing processes, right? That you, in Six Sigma, by the way, this is kind of a hybrid of the two kind of smushed together. All the things we know from the process space, it's applying it into the design space. The idea that what you think anecdotally, while it's the start, it's the seed of good ideas, usually our businesses are far too complex to just use anecdotal perceptions to decide whether something is going to work or not going to work, right? So if design thinking helps us vet out if something is desirable to our customer, lean startup helps us really understand the impact of that desirable idea on the customer, how they're going to interact with it. And then it also helps us figure out if this thing can actually be done. Like, how will it be done, and how are we going to make money off of it in a rigorous, scalable way, right? And the idea here is we're not going to speculate. We're just going to go test. So for all my process people out there who are going, this sounds exactly like lean for process. Yeah, you're totally right. It's exactly like lean for process, just applied to the concept of a new idea.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that leads us into, really talking about to what extent would we have lean startup has meant for adoption of new processes and versus like partnerships. I mean, Aisha, you're talking about the processes, which I think is great, and talking about how design thinking and lean startup are so interconnected. But Ed, maybe you could address a little more on, speak to the extent of which lean startup has meant adoption for new processes and really the connection to the startup community. And has that worked?
It has. We have great connections with folks in the local Boston area, like Mass Challenge. It's folks folks like IDEO, Frog, that by virtue of looking to lean startup methodologies, but other methodologies like design thinking, and people who I say want to change the world and the way we do things and bringing solutions to market faster. That's why I call it almost a religion in a way, and always seeking to learn new things. So lean startup is one thing. Aisha pointed out, design thinking is another methodology. 10 types of innovation is something that, another kind of lean way to understand how you can compete in the marketplace. So it's always pushing the boundaries, and pushing the boundaries actually creates those relationships, those great relationships. And, sometimes as an enterprise, you realize you can't get everything done yourself. And that's when you look at other companies like that are leveraging processes like these that you choose to go with, creating a business relationship, but a relationship that goes much, much further, in creating a collaborative ideology in a way.
Gretchen, I would add to that, because I know it builds into the second question about has it worked. Although it's only been 2 weeks on the job here at DentaQuest, like Ed, I sit between the outside universe and the ideas and implementation of business opportunities inside the company. I'd had that same position, and I held a position similar to that with Motorola as well as with Reebok. And I can tell you that in most instances, these were the types of practice areas that we employed at the lab at MIT with Motorola to tease out what Motorola Ventures Group was investing in, which primarily was startups, and how to have a quicker conversation with those startups so that they were better prepared to actually engage or embrace the real issues that are inside of a business, like any company. Because oftentimes, rather than it being embraced, it's sort of pushed out. Not everything is easily acceptable. And I think those are the methods that I really have been championing for a long time, and particularly what I'm going to be doing here at DentaQuest is to make those and they're not just startups, but the ideas and opportunities a lot stickier, so people embrace them rather than say it's something that is not for the current business model. And I think that is, for me, the big challenge I've seen over the years. Not that there's no ideas or that there aren't great people, particularly here in Boston, like Ed said, just hundreds of labs and people in these sort of activity areas, but it's getting the larger corporations to either set up or embrace methodologies for adoption. And that's really where I think most of the work for any of these innovation organizations needs to take place.
Yeah, great points. And as we're talking about that, Dan's mentioned Motorola, some of the other areas. Dan, do you have any examples of, lean startup and really how it has helped companies innovate? Any additional ones you could talk about?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, maybe in the examples of those that I described, an example I really harken back to as a success was working with a few early stage companies on wireless use of physiological monitoring. And this was, several years ago, and now, it's very trendy to be seeing those solutions actually be employed. What I could tell you is the early adoption had to do a lot with what we're talking about, rapid investigation, in looking at experimentation and building models, presenting those models to clinicians, to doctors, to relationships who Motorola and Reebok were intending on forging. That would be with companies like Welch Allyn and Medtronic and others. And I think that's a story for me that has to be told, is how do you create relationships with other organizations that also represent that same initiative that's supporting a startup. And in that case, what we did with FitSense was actually the early stage company we employed or invested in. We took those methodologies and those ideas and engaged them with those two other companies and made it more palatable, more representative of what the real requirements would be for an early stage technology to gain a toehold in a corporation. And the success of that, if you don't know the whole story, is that was the underlying technology that was adopted by Nike in the Nike Plus product, and eventually adopted by Welsh Allen in their first instantiations of their physiological 3-lead ECG, which I later won an award, by the way, and actually went on to not be employed initially with Welsh Allen, but with one of their startups, GMP Wireless. But I think that, there's a conversation that has to occur with how adoption by all the startups in our area needs to take that toehold. And I think I, for one, didn't have a guidepost. We sort of knew some of these practice methods just by our own discovery. But I think it's really become the basis for what we're talking about today, that those are the best methods for taking hold, rapid deployment, quick investigations, and not spending too much of the company's money to make a rapid conclusion whether they're viable or not.
Yeah, it's interesting your point about, Dan, the not investing too much up front. I always think of Zappos, right? I mean, I think most people know the online retailer shoe store, right? Yeah. Or online shoe retailer. But I'm always fascinated when I always hear the story how the founder went out and tested his hypothesis, right? Using Lean Startup. And instead of actually building the whole infrastructure, he actually put up, a little website. If anyone bought anything, he ran to the local store that he'd already taken pictures of those shoes at, paid full price for the shoes, right? And quickly shipped them out. I mean, talk about grassroots, right? I think that's fascinating, because when you look at, he was really trying to make sure he knew what do the consumers want before he invested that money up front, right? And I think
Gretchen,
that's a great example.
That's a really good story, because the important part of that story, as it applies to corporations, right? So in my world, I work for a big company who's not a startup. And so a lot of the things that are written for Lean Startup are written towards the startup, basically saying, hey, adopt these lean principles that these large companies have and how you're exploring what you're doing. The inverse of that, though, is that big companies often don't like the idea of a minimally viable prototype. They don't like the idea that you're going to kind of duct tape together a solution and put it in front of the customer. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest sells we have is it's okay. It's really all right to put up a picture and run out and buy the full price item and ship it. It really is, because the point of this is to understand how the customer is going to interact with this, not necessarily design it the way it's going to be forever and ever. And that is a huge hurdle in corporate America. That is just not the way they're used to doing things. They're what I call the big shebang. It's all or nothing, right? We're going to do it all at once right away without telling anybody and make a big reveal, or we don't want to do it at all. And that's one of the big hurdles corporations kind of need to get over in this space, is that no, this first thing is going to be it's going to be an ugly baby. It's going to be duct taped. It's not going to be great, but it's okay, because you're going to let the customer know you're experimenting, and they will fundamentally help you make it into something amazing, right? So it's a great story, because that's a really big hurdle in corporate America. If you pitch that idea to any CEO of a big company, I know what they'll do. They would not be happy with you. They would not at all like the idea of just kind of putting something together real quick and trying it out.
Gretchen, I think that's a good point that Alicia's making, that design thinking, as we've been describing it, also goes hand in hand with a cultural infusion of design thinking into a corporation, because while it's very common for all of us to see early stage prototypes and accept them and understand what we're doing, it's, to her point, it's not indicative of the way the corporate organization looks at or evaluates a concept. But that's one of my big goals here. I told the CEO that when I was interviewing with him. I said, I think design thinking is as much about employment of these new thoughts and ideas into the business as much as it is about impacting and affecting the culture of the company. So I think a good point, Alicia.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I know Anne-Marie Dumas was here on in May, or in November, I guess it was, one of our hangouts, and she's from GE, and she talked about how in GE has really worked to leverage FastWorks, which is they've labeled it. Yeah. It's an approach to product development with Lean Startup principles. And it's including like testing prototypes with consumers, then iterating. And they're really trying to train everybody at GE to adopt this practice. And like one of the examples was, the French door in a refrigerator, right? That it went through 18 iterations because they got customer feedback, iterate.
Yep.
And, it's just a constant exploration. And I thought that was interesting. Like when you're saying, Aisha, the large companies, I mean, they literally have to invest so much money into all this training just to make that cultural shift, right?
Yep.
But it's working.
And I bet for GE, there's probably a really good story there between Lean and why GE could adopt this, right? Because GE is known for being this is why the word Lean is involved in this concept. They're just literally borrowing the Lean process concepts, right? So I can imagine for a place like GE where this is part of their culture already, this is expanding that cultural norm into a new area, right? And that's kind of my tip for people. If you've got a Lean shop in your corporation, you've got something to piggyback onto. There's collateral there that you can borrow in this new space to get people to participate and be part of what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk a little bit about the challenges. Dan, I know we've talked a little on this front. What challenges have you seen?
Well, I think we've been touching on it, the adoption of these methodologies or the ideas resulting from these methodologies by the business group. And what we've done here at DentaQuest is our impact integration team is actually sitting not outside of the business, but it sits inside the business. Yeah. So my challenge is to work like Ed has been talking about with, a myriad of opportunities, spaces that are out there, and bring those into focus and present them to the business. But it's still a challenge. And I think all the things that we're saying are testimony to, why it's a challenge. But it's really where I think, as my manager has told me, let's look at some short wins. Let's look at some early things that we can present that will at least begin to have and open up the conversation. So to Alicia's point, they become more comfortable and confident with these methodologies versus, a complete workup of a prototype, only to find out that concept may later fail. So that's really what how I plan on adopting the methodologies inside of this company. I'd like to hear from the others on what they're doing.
Yeah, Dan, a challenge for that you mentioned is a shift in mindset. So we run fusion sessions, which are design thinking workshops, also strategy creation. And we had a doctor in, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Ed, let's cut the BS. I know what I want to build. Let's just do that. We have designers here. Let's just build that thing." And I said, "Just give me a half a day, and we'll go through my process. And if it's not working for you, we'll shift." And then 2 hours in, he pulled me aside again and he said, and we had happened to do the Jobs to be Done, which is a Clayton Christensen, method of thinking. And what he said to me is, "You shifted my thinking completely about, what we're doing here, and I'm going to follow your process." And, by the end, we created an experiment, and we, had successes, we had some failures, but the solution went in a direction that really met the customer's pains, their customer's needs, and he saw that. So it's that mind shift that you really have to do, and it's those, I call it just a 1 degree shift. So you can talk about lean startup all day long, but it's getting people to think differently, and once they see that, they're like, yeah, this is the right way. But that takes kind of passion, energy, drive, different ways of thinking. So don't just rely on lean startup. Look at other models that shift people's thinking and adapt to, how are you going to make that change to their thinking?
Yeah. My little trick is, if I'm in an organization that's got lean already, right? The same way you can bring lean into design thinking, you can bring design thinking into lean, right? Mm-hmm. So if the company has an environment where they have a lean shop already, instead of making the argument that we're going to bring those tools into product design, I try to make the argument a much safer argument. Hey, let me bring the design thinking tools into the process space. And all you need is the first aha. I think, Dan, that's what you're talking about. That very first time that someone goes, "Oh, I see what you're talking about." Right. Once you get that aha, you're sold. They're in. From that point on, right, that aha is going to bring you the emotional collateral you need to bring you through the uncomfortable stuff. And it will be uncomfortable because these people are going to fundamentally learn that they don't know their customers as well as they thought they did. That's a pretty scary thing to teach a bunch of senior leaders, right? So you need that the excitement of discovery to carry you through the rest of the process. And like I said, my little trick is if there's a space they're comfortable doing this already, these lean concepts, bring design thinking to that place versus the other way around, because they'll be, I think, because it's internal and it's not in front of the customer, they're much more willing to participate in that more safe environment, right? It's kind of like what happens in the Kaizen stays in the Kaizen, right? What happens in the lean room stays in the lean room. So they're usually pretty willing to at least give that a try.
Good point.
Yeah. No, I think that's the whole cultural shift that we're talking about is definitely something when you can get that aha moment, like Ed described, is, you're like, this is what I'm living for, along with that great product introduction, right? It's been successful. So let me just take a quick time out here. And for the folks listening in, please remember that we are engaging on Twitter at altitude_Inc. We're happy to engage with you. We also have Silaja here handling chat. If you have any questions or any input you'd like to give or any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. And again, the questions and answers are going to be taken. We will give you answers to your questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes. If you could please make sure to submit your questions in the tab that you can see on your screen, not in the chat, but in the questions and answers. And then we will ask our panelists those questions, particularly those with the most votes. So be sure to vote on them. Okay, and then back to the panelists. So Dan, I think we've talked a little bit about, the challenges, but are there any specific things that you can think of that didn't work? And then why didn't they, that people could learn from?
Yeah, I would say that was my last company, Isabella Products. I think we took our eye off the ball, and that's one thing that startups need to be managing, is that they're not getting too thin on customer focus, new opportunities, stay true to who their core business and core customer is. An example of that was probably due to an acquisition that we made of another company that was in the content side of the business, not the application and product side, in early childhood learning, which was the focus of our company. And they had an NSF grant provided to them for, I would call it a writer project, just a student writer project. Just because it was basically investigated and funded by NSF, the principals of the company felt, well, we should just be able to, dock it into our business and start and build a product from there. I think we missed that whole step that we've all been talking about today, in not asking the tough questions first. Should we build this product, and who really is the customer and what's the benefit? And instead of doing that, took that NSF work and began to spend quite a bit of development time, and that was my organization in the product development group, trying to build it and fit it into the methodology that we had already created. And I think that for me, part of it was, responding to the board, and I think you'll hear and read I think Ed makes some of those comments, as well as Eric in his book, that you need to keep your eye focused on the customer, not always on what the board is suggesting or pushing the startup to do, so that there's a better outcome. And that's a challenge, because you've got many people who look at a startup's success, and obviously those that sit on the board or the investors have a stake in this. But we didn't do enough time in investigation early on, because had we done that, I would have said either we weren't ready to launch that product, or we didn't have a great understanding of what was competitively already available, or what the customer really wanted. And as a result, the product was never launched.
It's a good example. It's interesting. We're talking about large corporations versus small. How can they really do the cultural mind shift, mindset change? And I think it's also like what Dan's saying too is, it's processes, but it's also just the DNA of the company, right? And how do you get that change? And so I'm just interested, Ed, you talked about the aha moment, but, lean startup moves fast. Corporations typically don't, right? Like, you have United Health, you have Fusion that you're trying to do. What are some of your challenges, and how are you making it work?
So great question. I think one of the biggest challenges is, thinking that, you're in a large corporation and you're here and you're paid because you have answers. We think the inverse with Fusion, that we're paid not to have answers, and the answers lie outside. They lie with our customers, and there is a sense of going out in the field, talking to your actual, your nurses, in our case, nurses, it could be consumers, it could be, physicians, and taking that time to, to really understand, to think, to synthesize, that information. So it is that challenge of breaking someone out of the office, getting out into the world, understand, having that deep empathy for whom you're solving for. And there's also something we do in design thinking, journey mapping, and it's looking kind of at that holistic experience, and not just looking at little chunks, because that really opens your eyes to what comes way before that moment when someone walks into a physician's office. They might have children that they need to take care of, or they might not be able to get to the doctor's office. But that shift in mindset of looking holistically, but then being able to chunk that down and say, wow, we could create an experiment here where, I'm making stuff up, but, we can partner with Uber to get people to the doctor's office, and imagine just changing someone's experience. But, again, looking broadly and then chunking down such that you can have that lean startup experiment, and feeling comfortable with A, not having the answer to begin with, B, developing that hypothesis, and then C, where can you start and how can we go to market super fast? But inherent in all that are all those big challenges of getting people out there, understanding through the consumer's or whom you serve's eyes, looking holistically, and then chunking down. So it's really a methodology of thinking more than anything, and changing people's thinking and bringing them through that process, and having them feel comfortable with, I don't know what the answer is now, but we're actually going to get there.
Aisha, do you have anything to add to that? Because I think Ed's points are spot on, but I know you've also been trying to do the shift at FPL.
Yeah, I've got more practical tips. How about that? That will be a good complement to the philosophy there. Lean startup has not been around very long, but Lean and Six Sigma have extremely vetted methodologies. And my tips and tricks here are, again, to borrow from Lean, right? So companies don't move fast; they just don't, right? But they've solved this already. About 30 years ago, 40 years ago, dude came up with TQM, total quality management, and for 40 years they've been figuring out how you get big companies to act like little companies, and that whole toolbox is developed in the Lean space, right? So in the Lean space, there's a tool called a Kaizen event, and the idea here is that you are going to fix a process over 5 days. And to do that, you're literally going to bring all the decision makers in a process into a room. They're going to commit to being there for 5 days. Beforehand, you're going to make commitments about what they're going to change and why they're going to change it. They agree to submit to the process. And at the end of that 5 days, they've got a thing to go do. They all know why they're going to do it. They were all part of the process in creating the new thing. That same exact form and format can be lifted and loaded into this space, right? So we don't call them Kaizens because, like I said, that's a Lean tool, and people, maybe because they've been through them before, have something associated with them. But if you literally go Google what is part of a Kaizen event, take out the word process map and put in the word journey map, and you've got a Lean startup sprint. They're literally the same exact things. So for the same reason a Kaizen works, that you're getting the decision makers in the room, that you have sponsorship and buy-in before you even walk in the door, that they're going to make change, that they're going to collaborate, that they're going to leave with something to go try. Those same tools are what allow us in this space to be nimble, to be agile. And those are 40-year-old vetted tools. And I don't need to tell you, I don't need to, proselytize about how great Lean is. They're pretty tested. They're pretty vetted. So there's been a lot of thinking and a lot of trying in that space to tighten up what that 4 or 5 days looks like. And I imagine that they probably look exactly like what most of us think an iteration sprint looks like. They're very, very similar.
Do you think, Alicia, that they boil that down, a lot of those practice areas down, so that they fit for a startup's landscape or community? I think is that what we're hearing?
Yeah, I think that's what Eric Rice's book is. Yeah. It's a book basically saying, hey, there's this methodology in the big companies that let them act like small companies. Why don't us as small companies just borrow it and use it to develop our space? Yeah. It's a brilliant association. And the good news is we don't have to guess. Like I said, there's like 40 years of rigorous testing all over corporate America on how to use Lean in a way that fits a company. And just like design thinking, it's a cultural shift. Just like design thinking and innovation, we know that it can't be done in small little pockets, really. It's got to be done across an organization. And I find, at least just for like selling to corporations, this idea, right? So oftentimes I get hired under the sexy promise of design thinking without people really understanding what it is. And I really rely on my Lean and Six Sigma toolbox, really rely on it to move into the space, because after we've refocused on the customer, what they need, that's what design thinking helps us do, the voice of the customer tools in Lean and Six Sigma, really we now need to move into how do you go do? And design thinking is a little light there. Right? There are lots of practitioners like Clay Christensen, like Alex Osterwalder, who have filled in the gaps, but what they filled it in with are these extremely vetted and tested tools that come from the Lean and Six Sigma spaces.
Yeah. One of Eric's points that I liked was, that not that they're diametrically opposed, but big companies are all about revenue and profit from established products, and small companies or startups are about getting to that product first before focusing on revenue and product. And that was the point I was trying to make earlier, is that oftentimes external forces are pushing the startup at too early a stage to be engaging in revenue creation or revenue generation, rather than points earlier in the conversation, find who the customer is, find what the best product is, attack the market with something that has been vetted and has a chance of surviving. So, so again, to these points you're making, Alicia, that some of those tools work well because that was the focus. How do we create more revenue? How do we, how do we engage customers more? And I think some of that is practical as well, but some is unique for startup situations.
Yeah, startups have the benefit that startups have the benefit that they know they don't know their customer. That's their biggest benefit. The biggest thing they have going for them is they don't know anything yet. Yeah. Corporations, that's the big hurdle they have to get over. That's the big aha moment for them the first time they're in a sprint, is that they don't know their customer quite as well as they thought they did. And to me, that's what Lean Startup does in a corporation. It brings us back to that startup mindset, which is kind of like a curious development mindset versus to your story earlier, that the sponsor who kind of said, let's cut the BS. I know what I want to do. Oh, that's death to an idea right there. Whenever I hear that, I get real nervous.
Yeah. Definitely. So I love the contrast between a startup and an enterprise. One of the tools I've found incredibly effective is the 10 types of innovation. And they really encourage you to look at the experience that you're creating in the marketplace, what platform that you could leverage, and then what does your business model look like. So I've seen failure in both startups. I've been a part of 3 startups in the Boston area. To not look at that full spectrum of what is our business model, what experiences are we creating, and how can we achieve that. So kind of post your experimentation or during your experimentation, thinking about that full holistic model. Same in the enterprise, because you may be too dependent on your existing model, but can you disrupt that model? Can you change it through new experiences and or a new platform offering? So just a great tool to go research as far as Lean Startup is the 10 types of innovation. So
yeah, I like that a lot too as well. Yeah.
So let's do a little bit of a shift. And again, reminder to everyone listening in, please do put your questions in. We'll get to them in 5 to 10 minutes. All right. So just a little shift here. We've talked about design thinking. We've talked about Lean Startup. Aisha talked about very much how they complement. Dan, I'd love your viewpoints on what's the difference between Lean Startup and Agile, another buzzword. Is there a difference?
Well, I've had the benefit of using Agile at Isabella. Primarily, it was designed, and the principles of Agile were designed for software development, although I think in some instances, I could see that they could be applied to any portion of the product development process. It's a self-organizing methodology. It's breaking the program down into smaller bites. There's usually a manager, a scrum manager, who's actively managing those. And I think to the earlier point, it's a lot about teams self-organizing and doing things in smaller bites and determining an outcome prior to completing the entire exercise and finding out that there's quite a few problems that hadn't been addressed. So, maybe a different focus, but certainly to the point of Lean Startup, a lot of the same activities, breaking down things, getting things to happen more rapidly, smaller teams to affect an outcome, a better outcome. Anybody else want to add to that?
I think one of the big drivers for large enterprises is agile methodology, and not only that, startups as well, and how they really think about delivering solutions to market. Where I've seen it fail is you do fire up an agile team and they don't have a strategy, and the strategy is based on the lean startup methodology and design thinking, as opposed to your classic MBA strategies. But what it really does is have you hone in on, whom are you serving from a persona perspective, what pains are you addressing, what's your hypothesis on that, and bringing the agile team through that process so they have a full understanding of, oh yeah, I know whom we're serving, I know why we're doing, what we're doing. And not only that, as you start to chunk out your sprints, you can actually say, what are our objectives for this sprint? What are we experimenting, for? And then what are our key results we're actually looking to achieve? So then you have both meaning, and you have process, and you have measurables. That's when it's truly successful. But I've seen that fail, both in large companies and startups as well.
Yeah, great point. Ed, how about, as you're talking about Agile and we're talking about Lean, can you relate it to design thinking, right? And talk maybe similarities and differences?
Sure. So in my mind, Agile is a great process. And then design thinking, what that does is really start, understanding whom you're serving, and from a persona perspective, what journey they're going through, what their current pains are, and how you can actually address those pains. And then really that becomes the raw material to then feed to that agile process. How are you thinking about your minimal viable product? Once you've looked at that kind of holistic picture of the journey, the pains, and then what can you actually identify as your minimal viable product that you can actually test against, and then bringing that back to the the consumers whom you serve, and then testing to see if you have those key results. So that's how I think separate. And it's interesting because with Fusion, what we've done is we've actually created what we call business experience and development. And what we're doing is we're fusing together different methodologies that can actually work. So most recently, we had senior executives writing, looking at a journey map and actually creating user stories and then putting value behind those user stories. We actually had users in the room too. But really, that to me, fusing together of all these methodologies for a great outcome. And Aisha said it, pick the best tool for the right moment that you're looking to solve for. So it's a little bit of lean startup. It's a little bit of design thinking. It's a little bit of how does that feed the agile process. So, and I think that's the opportunity for all of us is selecting the right tools at the right time.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Validating what the customer wants, whether you're using prototypes or research or whatever. Don't just assume you know what they want, right? So doing it up front. That's very, very good point. So I want to ask the panelists a few more questions, then we'll get to the audience's questions. So moving forward, so now we've talked a lot about lean startup, what has happened, but let's now address, Dan, I'll ask you to start with this. Moving forward, how is your company planning to utilize these various methodologies? I know you're in a new job right now, so would be interested on what your thinking is as you move forward.
Well, I think a lot like Ed has built, we're calling the team Impact Integration Group, and purposely avoided the word innovation. I didn't want to come on as the innovation officer. It was a good way to get a shoe in the side of the head around here. And I think it's because one of the big opportunities for me is that I have top funnel and I have a bottom funnel, and I'm integrating the processes. Sorry, I'm using my hands, but the top funnel is what we've been talking about, all those opportunities outside the company, and the bottom funnel, all the opportunities inside the company that need a voice and need a process for engagement. And I think a lot of what I've been using and practicing in my own methods over the years, plus I think some of the techniques that are applied through Lean Startup will certainly be practically applied here as I begin that journey. I liked what Aisha said, because I don't think it's one method or the other. I was telling this to the CEO, I said, it's what works inside of our culture. If I force fit things here that I'm just going to get a glazed look over people's faces when I'm trying to propose, I'm dead in the water. One of my big goals in the first few weeks is trying to learn a little bit more about that culture, a little bit more about what has worked, what hasn't worked, and not to follow in the step of what has worked, but to be sure that I'm at least addressing some of those techniques or methods. So to Ed's earlier point, or Aisha's, you're getting some level of that 1% of familiarity, so people aren't completely glazed over by what it is you're trying to propose. So anyone else? I can share please. It's not open just to me, but I think that idea for me is certainly one that, as I said earlier, I'm spending an early amount of time learning and investigating and understanding what is and isn't here culturally with respect to new product and new process development.
Yeah, great points.
LPL has,
No, go ahead.
sorry. I say LPL has embraced design thinking for a while. 2.5, 3 years. It's been a formal word in their corporation that they're using and trying to incorporate in what they're doing. But experimentation is a fairly new concept for them. Our new CEO, Dan Arnold, is really excited by experimentation. And so I have found, we have gotten to this place now where people realize they need customer centricity. People realize that the customer and the customer experience has to be the reason they do things, not a reason, the reason, right? And now they're looking for real, tangible ways they can take those learnings and create something. And that's really where experimentation comes into play, right? Because, and they're just learning. This is a new endeavor for them. So they're going through all of the rigor and heartache of trying this out and not getting expected results. I'm not going to use the F word here because corporate America doesn't like it, right? So no problem. Not use, and by F word, I meant failure. But yeah, exactly. So they're really wrapping their hands around what does it feel like to learn? Because in corporate America, we don't do that a whole bunch. We don't realize that, oh yeah, that doesn't feel nice when we think we're right and we go out and we figure out we're not, right? So they're really, as a group, as they begin this, they're going through what I think is the biggest hurdle, which is this emotional process where you have this understanding that, I don't know my customers as well as I thought I did. I'm going to mess up a whole bunch. And it's okay, right? That's the end of this. It's all right because now we have a way forward. So it's an exciting time at LPL. They are really beginning to embrace the concepts of experimentation. I hear them using words like experiment and hypothesis and minimally viable prototype. So they're not sure what to do with all that stuff quite yet, but the language is there and the excitement is there and the learnings are there. And that's kind of the important stuff.
Yeah, which is great. All right, I'm going to
by the way, messy at first. It's not clean to begin with. It's very, very messy to begin with.
Great. I'm going to jump right in because I want to make sure to do a wrap with the panelists and then get to the questions of the audience, as I promised. So what I'd love to do just to wrap, and you can repeat what you've already said, but just each of you can just go around and maybe give 2 takeaways that you want to make sure the audience remembers based on this hangout. So Ed, how about I have you jump in first?
Sure, absolutely. Aisha, you triggered this thought. It's around giving yourself space to become an artist in a way. I think a lot of us think we're scientists in a company. We have, the processes to bring to bear, and we have that through experimentation. But become that artist tool too that picks those different tools like, lean startup, like design thinking, like the 10 types of innovation, and give yourself room to become that business artist in a way through experimentation to the market you serve.
Right on.
Right on. Aisha, do you want to jump in?
I'm going to add a word. I think we need to channel our inner inventors, our inner Thomas Edison, right? Part inspiration, part scientist. I love the word lab. I use it a lot. It's that because the labs provide the safe space to go and check things out and try, right? It's not the same as a project. When you're coming into a lab, it's way different than going into a project room, right? So the big thing I tell people when they're just starting this is it's messy, it's hard, and it's a lot harder to learn things than you think. But you really, that's the mindset you need. You need to walk into this, and everyone needs to walk into this knowing that they're coming to discover things, not to prove things. And those are 2 very, very different things.
Absolutely. Dan, what are your takeaways for the audience?
I'd build on Aisha too. I would say, that like I've discussed a moment ago, look internally as well as externally for, what works, and look to the folks who might be internal who are passionate about this and just haven't had a voice. Oftentimes, some of the best solutions are inside, and there hasn't been a channel or a mechanism for them to be able to express or engage their idea thinking, or that they're thinking with a process whose goal is to create and engage new design thinking, and hopefully a great result coming from that. So while it's always great to look outside, I think it's really healthy to look inside.
Yeah, absolutely great points. I absolutely want to thank our panelists, and I'm not going to let them go yet because we'll be answering your questions. I think we have some great points on lean startup methodology. It favors experimentation right over like the more elaborate planning. We need more of an entrepreneurial, innovation-based economy, right? And moving forward there to get more new innovation, quote unquote. I think we talked a little bit, Zappos is an example I'd raise. We talked about Motorola. We can hear definitely what Ed is doing to get those aha moments at Fusion, which is great. So I hope folks have definitely learned. We hear more about shift the thinking. It's a cultural mindset shift, right? In terms of build, measure, learn. Start to look more to learn about your user first, make the customer the user at your central hub, and then measure, then build, and iterate. So I think it's really important that we take some of these things to heart, as we grow and as we compete, as we move forward. Also, I'd like to encourage folks, if you'd like, go to www.altitudeinc.com. We have plenty of valuable free resources on design thinking, innovation, lean startup. And also in May 18th, we will have another hangout with United Health again, and also AT&T and Stanley Black & Decker on innovation is born where physical and digital meet, which essentially we'll talk about IoT and things like that moving forward. So I encourage you to go there. And so with that, I'd absolutely like to go to your questions. So let me move to those, and we will ask the panelists if anything resonates, make sure that you jump in on that. So I'm starting with the questions that have the most votes. So if anyone really wants to make sure that their question gets asked, you need to ask other folks to vote for it. All right. So we have one from Kieran here. Where do you believe the traditional business plan should sit relative to the lean canvas model?
Business plan.
This is the awkward thing where we all decide who's going to go first. My 2 cents is I think a traditional business plan is out, quite frankly. Traditional business planning has a lot to do with the how and not a lot to do with the why, right? So the lean canvas, the value proposition canvas, the business model canvas, all of these tools are what they're doing at the end of the day is very, very tangibly connecting what your customer wants and needs to what you do as a company. And a traditional business plan frankly doesn't have that, right? So to me, it would be subordinate to the lean canvas or subordinate to any of those other canvases. It's just basically subordinate to the customer need. And what lean startup is all about is really, really exploring and observing and extrapolating the customer need to figure out how you as a company are going to, take advantage of or get value out of what the customer needs. And so I'm not a big fan of the traditional business planning. I think it is really, really myopic, and it's really, really focused on things like, feasibility, how do we do it, or viability, can we make money, versus desirability, which is what does the customer want. It's, again, the big advantage startups have is they don't have a whole bunch of processes and a whole bunch of past planning to kind of rely on or get trapped in. They can really live in that desirability place. So for me, I get nervous when I see traditional business plans, and I like to see them just plain old replaced with the canvases or the plans that really connect to customer need first.
I think.
Aisha, I'll actually. Sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
It's the awkward talk over.
I'd say I'd add to that. It's almost a yes and, because we had recently had a group in for a fusion session, which it's 2 days, and it was, our existing business model, our existing business plan with a partner. So we had them in to actually collaborate around the lean canvas to say, how do we completely shift, because we have measurables, right, in that business plan. How do we improve these measurables through differentiation, through a dramatic shift in what we offer today? And in fact, it was an experience that will result in, several $100 million of change to our business plan, so that there is that coupling of how are you operating today. And I think when you said subordinate, that's a good way to think about it. Like, you do have your existing business plan, but what could be that dramatic shift that changes the game, right? But that's lean thinking. In lean startup is, what is that dramatic shift? Let's go talk to our partners, our customers, and see where we can actually have that impact.
Yep. I'm going to jump to the next question just so we can make sure to get to more of them. So can you share some metrics or industry studies that argue in favor of lean startup over the more traditional methods? And what tactics do you use to convince client leadership to embark on a lean startup approach? Dan, do you want to maybe take that, because you talked a little bit about it from your last company?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I honestly haven't put metrics yet in place here, but I think I think the corporations and companies should start by saying it's an important area and fund it, and actually bring people in who are responsible for doing it the way I think the three of us represent for our companies. That's step one. Step two, I think, is a little bit of what Aisha had pointed out. Where do these methods and practice areas fall? Are they for incremental growth? Are they for breakaway growth? Are they for disruptive growth? And I think there's metrics and measures that I'm applying here as I evaluate, what's on our roadmap against what type of innovation or new product opportunity it is. And Ed said it correctly. A lot of it is iterative. A lot of it is incremental. And that's probably why these types of methods don't apply to traditional business manners or business metrics and practices. I think there's a whole new set that's evolved for leading or breakthrough ideas, and certainly for disruption. And I think that's what needs, for me particularly, I need to resolve. So as we go into a brief or we go into a proposal, I've identified what level of program type it is, and then take those metrics that have been established for that type of program and be sure that they're employed within the team or against the final outcome of whether it is or isn't a good idea.
Great. Any other thoughts, Aisha or Ed?
Yeah, but actually to get Fusion up and operational, had to pitch to a finance committee in the company, and they said, what can you achieve? So I reflect, there was a GE study that said in the industry, it classically takes 12 to 15 months to bring a solution to market. But by lean startup methodologies, it's 4 to 6 months. So leveraging, a concept like that. In fact, one of the startups that I helped found, SnapApp, we were able to bring from idea to a market product within 4 months. So having, anecdotal information like that to support the theory. And I think one layer deeper is, measuring your Agile process around sprints and applying what they call objectives and key results. So you'd be able to tell your business partners perhaps that, hey, here's what we're looking to achieve. Here's how fast we can actually bring it to market. And here are the measurables, whether it be, reduced sales time or et cetera, but looking at those objectives and key results in a lean startup in Agile methodology is super important.
Yeah, great point. I'm going to continue rolling here. It's we have a few more minutes. There is one question that I'm just going to make a comment on, and then we'll move forward. Is someone has made a statement more so about that we do need to change the way teams work, train people, new skills. I'm not sure what the question is out of that, but it really ties with the whole cultural mind shift. And what I'll just comment on is we did have a hangout in November, which you could find on our website, which is selling, frankly, innovation design thinking internally. So that might be something that would help address the question that you may have intended there. Okay, so I just want to comment on that. And then let's go to the next question. It says, just wondering if anyone has undertaken a formal evaluation of lean startup. It seems there is a lot of anecdotal information and evidence, but not formal hard data to back it up. Now, I think we've given some examples today, so I don't know if there's anything additional any of the panelists have to help someone feel more comfortable about a formal evaluation.
I think you're going to have a hard time getting a formal evaluation here, because it's a little bit saying like, hey, does someone know if science works? Has anyone measured if science works? And I don't mean that tongue in cheek. What I'm implying is that within every lean experiment, it proves itself out. That's the point of the experiment. It is set up to be statistically and scientifically rigorous, right? So you're looking for empiric data when you're testing something. So I don't think anyone has gone above that and saying, hey, does anyone know if empiric data collection actually works? I think it's just assumed, because in each experiment, you're getting statistically rigorous information back that says, yay, your hypothesis working, or nay, it is not working. So if you were looking for something to really kind of present upward to say, look how awesome this is, you might have better luck looking in the traditional lean spaces or Six Sigma spaces. Motorola and the inventors of Six Sigma have a fantastic story. And there's lots and lots of case studies here that you can pull from that kind of test out and validate the basic premises that the lean startup is piggybacking on. And also, Eric Ries hosts a conference every year where just like most scientific communities where you have an experiment where it can have peer review and you can talk about the results, once a year, many lean practitioners, lean startup practitioners get together in California and have that peer-reviewed conversation where they can kind of demonstrate their findings and have other people basically say if they're bogus or not. So because the community is set up kind of the way the scientific community is, I don't think anyone has gone above and beyond the rigor that's just built in to say whether or not it's working. I think basically it's implied with each experiment that you either validate or don't, that is in fact the thing that shows that, yep, it works or it doesn't. Because don't forget, the point of a lean experiment isn't to prove you're right. The point of a lean experiment is to see if you know something or not, right? So more of my experiments come back null than validated. More come back to say, no, that's not what we thought it was at all, than to say, oh, that's exactly what we thought it was. So I'm not sure at the end of the day you'd be able to measure that what you would have saved by not going to do the idea, not going to do the bad idea, which is what you'd really have to quantify to get the big impact if you were going to look, across corporate America.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I would say, Gretchen, tell me that, going back to those comments from all three of us about making sure these processes work inside of your culture and that they're appropriate. You mentioned Motorola, and I can tell you some horror stories of things that didn't work by the things that we invented. And I mean, a classic case was, we kind of discovered and built the first product, StarTAC, basically on a skunk work, and then did a lot of practical process management development for the rest of the program from there up until a secret bunch of guys went off into a corner and designed Razor the very same way that they did StarTAC, which is really inherent to that was the culture inside of the company that almost wasn't forced to be broken, but it was forced to be considering a lot of these new methodologies. But the true culture of that company was, one that was about, skunk works and going off and a bunch of, guys go into a lab and figure it out and waha, there it is. And I can't say that I agreed with it, but I saw the outcome. One product that I, was on that program was StarTAC. And then I watched from Cambridge, from the advanced product groups, how they did Razor, and it was exactly the same way by the same guys. So I don't know. Again, the story is more about do what works. Use you said it correctly, the toolboxes that are available to help it work inside of your organization. That's my 2 cents.
Great. Well, I want to wrap up. I realize we're at the hour, and I really very much appreciate the lively dialogue and great information that our panelists have shared. And I thank Ed from United Health Infusion and Dan from Now DentaQuest, and also Aisha, who is from LPL Financial. It's an absolutely informative dialogue. I thank our audience for joining in, and I hope we'll see you next month on May 18th.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.